It's late September 1938. Europe is gripped by fear. World War I was not long ago, memories of it are fresh, and countries are trying to avoid further carnage. In a hall in Munich, leaders are gathering to make a decision that will change the fates of millions, a decision that will go down in history as a symbol of the appeasement policy. On September 30th, 1938, they will sign a document that will sever a large, strategically important region from Czechoslovakia, the Sudetenland. This is the Munich Agreement. On one side of the table is Adolf Hitler, demanding the handover of the Sudetenland, the German-speaking regions of Czechoslovakia, home to millions of ethnic Germans. On the other are Neville Chamberlain, British Prime Minister, and Edouard Daladier, French Prime Minister. Italian dictator Benito Mussolini acts as a mediator and effectively signs as another guarantor of the agreement. Czechoslovakia, however, was not invited to the negotiations. Its fate was decided without it. That's right. A key decision about the integrity and security of the state was made without the state's participation. This was a precedent of international political disregard for sovereignty. Each participant had its own logic. Hitler wanted to quickly and legally, from an international perspective, annex territories where Germans constituted a majority, acquire Czechoslovakia's industrial and defense resources, and weaken it as a barrier to further conquests. Chamberlain and Daladier sought a way to avoid war. The memory of World War I and the fear of a new catastrophe led them to believe that ceding a small territory was a small price to pay for peace. Chamberlain believed that an agreement with Hitler could maintain peace. Mussolini saw himself as a peacemaker, while Italy saw a chance to strengthen its influence in Central Europe. What was written in the agreement? Transfer of the Sudetenland to Germany. Czechoslovakia was required to withdraw its troops within 10 days and hand over this entire border territory to Germany. New borders. In fact, the borderline was moved approximately 40 to 50 kilometers closer to Prague, which threatened the vulnerability of the entire Czech Republic. Dispute resolution. At our request and under pressure from Poland and Hungary, Czechoslovakia agreed to resolve all border disputes with these neighbors, exclusion of Czechoslovakia from the negotiations. Czechoslovak representatives were present at the meeting, including Hubert Masaryk and Wojtek Masny, but were not present for the discussion of the terms and were unable to voice their objections. They merely signed the completed document. In the text of the agreement, the countries agreed to the transfer of the Sudetenland to Germany. German troops were granted the right to enter and occupy this region. The decision was accompanied by Hitler's promise that this was Germany's last territorial claim, and a promise from the Western side that the concession would ensure peace in Europe. In practice, the language blocked the immediate occupation of the strategically important part of Czechoslovakia's fortifications and industry. Czechoslovakia was forced to comply. Under pressure from its guarantors, Great Britain and France, it accepted the terms. This was a clear example of how international politics viewed greater European security as more important than the rights of a small state to self-determination. Excluding Czechoslovakia from the negotiations was more than just a diplomatic gaffe. It violated a fundamental principle of international law at the time. In the days following Munich, events unfolded rapidly. By October 1st, 1938, German units had crossed the border, and by October 10th, had completely occupied the Sudetenland. Territorial and economic loss. Czechoslovakia lost approximately a fifth of its territory and a significant portion of its heavy industry, mines, and fortifications in the Sudetenland. This seriously weakened its defenses and economy. The policy of appeasement reached its climax and failed. The Western powers thought concessions would deter Hitler. Instead, they strengthened his position and demonstrated that threats could be used to extract concessions. From December 1938 to February 1939, the situation continued to deteriorate. In December, Germany forced Czechoslovakia to demilitarize its fortifications on its border. Finally, on March 14, 1939, it became clear that the Munich Peace Treaty had merely delayed rather than averted the storm. Hitler invited Czechoslovak President Hácha to Berlin and confronted him with the creation of a German protectorate. Bohemia and Moravia officially became a protectorate of the Third Reich, and the Czech Republic was completely occupied. On the same day, Slovakia declared its independence. the First Slovak Republic, and effectively entered the German sphere of influence. These events demonstrated that the West had lost the initiative. As a historian later noted, the subsequent Anschluss of Czechoslovakia in 1939 demonstrated that the policy of appeasement had failed. Hitler's plans became clear, and European politicians were faced with the inevitability of war. Munich became a symbol of how concessions to the aggressor only strengthened its confidence in impunity. Munich demonstrated the limits of the political logic of the price of peace. The attempt to avoid a major conflict by making territorial concessions to an enemy bent on expansion strengthened the aggressor and precipitated the war. Diplomatic isolation of the victim is a grave mistake. When a great power assumes the right to decide the fate of a small one, the legal and moral foundations of international relations are destroyed. The strategic weakening of Czechoslovakia made Central Europe more vulnerable. This was directly linked to subsequent aggressions and the outbreak of a major conflict. Returning in my mind to the hall in Munich on September 30th, signatures on papers, handshakes, reassuring words about peace in our time, the clicking of cameras and tabloid triumph, and at the same time, behind this display, calculations were being made. Where to get factories and roads, who would lose their homes and jobs, who would end up on the Germans' lists of unreliable people. The story of Munich is a lesson in the tragic consequences of a foreign policy built on fear and compromise with an aggressor. But this was only a small beginning of what was to come.